Now, I don't know about you, but I actually think one of the most interesting things about this transfer window isn't necessarily who West Ham are signing, although who we do sign is ultimately going to give us a clue as to whether we can mount a serious promotion challenge or not. But it's who we're not hearing about in all these various transfer rumours that are currently circulating. Because I've got a feeling that there are one or two players that are not in the headlines at the moment that West Ham are targeting. And I think that tells us quite a lot about what's changed or what's changing at West Ham. Because if there was ever any further proof needed that the old transfer leaks have really stopped, you've only got to look at some of the stories doing the rounds at the moment. Now, we're at the stage where even Sky Sports are reporting things that, to me, feel more like educated guesses than genuine information coming out of this football club. And that's not necessarily a criticism on Sky. They're only reporting what they're told. But when you look at some of the stories we're getting, Jamie Vardy, Dele Alli, and the wild transfer values surrounding Troy Parrott, you start to wonder whether the media actually knows exactly what's going on at West Ham. And that's quite important and quite significant because for years, one of the defining characteristics of West Ham's transfer windows was that you could almost follow the recruitment process through the media. You'd hear about a player, then you'd hear about an inquiry, a bid, another bid, someone saying that the player wanted to come, someone saying that the player was almost going to go elsewhere, someone saying that the deal was done, someone saying the deal was not done because we'd been pipped to the post by another club and so on. And before you knew it, we'd all convinced ourselves that this player was definitely coming. And how come he wasn't at West Ham? Why did we miss out on him? And a lot of that information seemed to come from inside the club. You know, the old saying, we tried, it's quite laughable, really, isn't it? But now, David Sullivan, who has always seemed to be at the center of most of the narrative, is no longer around. Well, he is, but he's no longer part of the board. So those leaks have stopped. Okay, he was there on Saturday. We all know that. But that doesn't mean he's back making transfer deals. Of course, he remains a shareholder, major shareholder, but he's no longer sitting there involved in the day-to-day running of this club, and that includes transfers. And if I'm not saying for 1 second that every transfer story came from Sullivan and his cohorts, but most of them did. But the culture around West Ham's business now feels quite different. It's almost as if that leaking tap has been switched off, and that now the stories that we're getting are becoming kind of wilder than ever before. And before I go into them, if you're new to this channel or if you've watched the West Ham Voice before, a QR code has just appeared in the top corner there. If you enjoy the content, why not become a subscriber of the channel? Costs nothing to subscribe. All the content is free. So let's start off with Jamie Vardy. Now, when I saw the story on Sky, I thought, here we go again. Sky are reporting that West Ham are monitoring Vardy's situation as we look to strengthen our striker position. And we're talking about a 39-year-old free agent who left Cremonese after scoring 7 goals in Serie A for them last season. Now, I have absolutely no problem with Jamie Vardy as a footballer, none whatsoever. And in fact, a lot of fans really would like him to come to West Ham. He's had a great career, Premier League champion, English international, 145 Premier League goals, a great character of English football. But what exactly are we meant to be monitoring here? He's a free agent. If West Ham United genuinely want Jamie Vardy, you don't need to monitor anything. You pick up the phone, you find out what he wants, and you find out what the contract requirements are, and then you either do a deal or you don't. So it's almost as though the phrase West Ham are monitoring has become football's journalism way of saying we haven't really got a clue whether West Ham United are interested or not. And that's what makes this story quite irritating, because the suggestion is that Vardy is an option if West Ham don't get the preferred targets that we're going for. And that sounds to me like the sort of West Ham transfer story that we'd hear about from years before. An experienced player, a free transfer, short-term deal, big name, bags of experience. Callum Wilson, anyone? And, then you get he's available, he knows the league, he's experienced, it won't cost anything. And suddenly we're talking ourselves into that he's definitely coming to West Ham United. But I believe for a moment that Nuno and Nils Koppen are sitting there going, right, our first choice striker may not be available. Let's call Jamie Vardy. I'm not convinced. In fact, I'm going to stick my neck out here. I don't think the Jamie Vardy story is a serious one, to be honest with you. I could be completely wrong, of course. And if he does sign, I'll quite happily come back here with egg on my face. But at the moment, I think it's a classic example of somebody looking at West Ham's situation, looking at the fact that we need another striker, looking at the fact that Jamie Vardy is available for nothing, putting two and two together. And because West Ham aren't saying anything, nobody for the club is stepping forward to say, well, that's not going to happen. And the silence is creating the story. Then, of course, we get to Dele Alli. I talked about him in a show that came out late last night because we've had reports and discussions about the possibility of Dele Alli training with West Ham, potentially trying to impress Nuno and earn himself a one-year deal with an option of a further year. But here's the thing. The current reporting around the claim that Dele Alli is training with West Ham is unconfirmed. TalkSport itself reported that the training story has not been confirmed. And while discussing the possibility of West Ham being the sort of club that could give Dele Alli a chance, it doesn't match. And that makes me laugh a little bit because if Dele Alli was really training at Rush Green, how come no one's seen him? You've only got to think about it for a moment. You've got fans around the Rush Green practically every day. Fans are there waiting for the players to go to training or come out of training so they can get their photos taken with them or get them to sign autographs and stuff like that. Fans are watching the players coming and going. Social media is full of photographs from the training ground, around the gates. And yet, suddenly, Dele Alli is apparently training with West Ham, and we've got no evidence of that. Nothing from the club, nothing from any fan to say, I've seen Dele Alli at Rush Green. And nothing from anyone you'd expect to know. Now, that doesn't mean he definitely isn't there. Of course it doesn't. But football clubs can keep things quite private if they want to. And if West Ham really did want to bring somebody in quietly to have a look, they could certainly do that. But again, you've got to look at the language. He could be signing, potentially may sign, if he impresses, a one-year deal. That isn't a transfer story. That's hypothetical. And yet we're discussing it as though West Ham have already halfway towards signing Dele Alli. And again, I come back to the same point. This is exactly the sort of story that would have fitted the old West Ham narrative. A former England international, kind of a big name, free agent, etc., etc., etc. Maybe Dele Alli comes in and does absolutely tear up the Championship. I don't know. Maybe Nuno gets something out of him that other managers can't. Maybe the bloke has got one more chapter left in him. Who knows? But is there genuine evidence that West Ham are pursuing him? No. And this distinction matters because we're now in a situation where the absence of information, the absence of leaks, is actually becoming the information itself. And then we move on to Troy Parrott. And this is the one where I think we can say with certainty that there is something in the offing here. West Ham have been linked to Troy Parrott for a while, 3 seasons in a row now, or 3 summers in a row now. And TalkSport reported last week that West Ham were pushing hard for the AZ Alkmaar striker, describing him as a £25 million player. And apparently, I didn't know this, but Spurs have got a 20% sell-on clause. So, of course, if AZ Alkmaar are going to sell him, they're going to want as much money as they can, especially if they're going to give Spurs 20% of it, or 20% of the profit. Parrot, 51 goals in 95 appearances for the Dutch club. So unlike the Vardy story, there's an argument here. There's a footballing argument here. He's a young striker. He's scoring goals. He's developed in the Netherlands. He's got international experience, and he's only 24 years of age. So he looks like the sort of player that if we sign him and he brings us up to the Premier League, he will do well in the Premier League as well. Unlike with can you see us signing Jamie Vardy or Dele Alli, and if we get promoted, they're going to be playing in the Premier League next season? No, I can't either. Whereas Troy Parrott at the age of 24, if he does well and brings us to the Premier League, there's a player that is going to do well in the Premier League with us. But it's the price. That's the thing that's confusing about all this. Because 1 minute we're hearing £27 million, then it's 25, and then apparently our first bid has been only 15 million. Why is it 15 million if he's rated at 27 million? You know, apparently now we're hearing that AZ Alkmaar are rating him at around 20, 22 million, something like that. God, if you're sitting there thinking, well, hang on a minute, which one is it? Have we bid 15 million? Is it 20 million? Is it 25 million? Is it meant to be 27 million? Are we even negotiating anything at all? Is there an agreement in place? Is West Ham interested? Is AZ Alkmaar interested in selling the player? And that's where, something has significantly changed. We're all guessing, in a way, as frustrated as I sound, it's actually a good thing because, for us supporters, it's frustrating. I'd much rather Nuno and Niels Koppen were keeping their mouths shut, as they are, than everyone knowing our business. You've only got to look at what happened with the signing of Joel Veltman. That's a perfect example of how nobody knows exactly what's going on at West Ham. There wasn't this huge 2-week build-up where every journalist on social media was telling us that Veltman was definitely going to join West Ham. It came out of nowhere. And then suddenly we're hearing he's having a medical, and next day he was confirmed as our first transfer of the summer. And that's great. Keep your mouth shut, identify your players, do your negotiations, get the player through the door, and then everyone knows. Quite simple, really. And I think that's where Niels Koppen and Nuno are potentially changing the culture of this club. Because Koppen has only recently come into football, in the footballing structure of West Ham, and we've already seen examples of reporting being wide of the mark. You think about it, the sort of players that Niels Koppen is meant to be identifying, Dele Alli and Jamie Vardy are not in that mould. All right, one could argue, well, how come then we've signed Joel Veltman? Completely different scenario. Joel Veltman, until the end of last season, was playing Premier League football. Jamie Vardy wasn't. And Dele Alli wasn't, and Veltman is still, even at 34 for a defender, might be a little bit old, but he's still in his prime. He's still a player that we know we're going to get something out of him. And you've only got to look at other stories. Back in July, we were apparently so close to signing Gustavo Var, because but we were told on a daily basis, he's close. He's about to say, even I reported, from the stories that I was reading, he's about to come and have his medical, but nothing came out. And this is where the narrative changes for West Ham, because now we're kind of looking at things and going, what we need. We know we need another striker. But we can't keep thinking that every player that's mentioned is going to be an automatic link to us, to be honest with you. You've got to look at Nuno. He's not someone who's going to give much away. You ask him in interviews what the plans are, and he gives you the usual response. We need to improve. We're working on it. We'll see. We need to focus on the players we have. And then he moves on to another subject. And that's exactly what you want from a manager. You don't want Nuno sitting there going, yeah, we're after this bloke from AZ. We've offered 15 mil. They want 20 mil. Maybe it'll get done by Thursday. That's not what you want to hear. So I'm quite glad that the leaks aren't coming out, as frustrating as it is. So if Nuno and Koppen really are keeping everything behind closed doors, I actually applaud them for it. And it makes me wonder whether we're looking at in things, in a very different way, because we're spending all our time, getting our heads around Jamie Vardy and Dele Alli and talking about what price Troy Parrott's going to come for. We're talking about the players that journalists and social media accounts have decided might be coming to West Ham. But what if these aren't the real targets at all? What if there's another striker that we've barely mentioned? And I reckon this is where the leaks stopping are having us really not knowing what's going on. I would wager that there's a striker out there that we've mentioned maybe in passing or maybe not at all. And then suddenly one morning, West Ham are going to announce that the player's coming in for a medical and we're about to sign him. And that way, I think it's much better. So that's why I've been trying to do as few transfer stories as I can. I've done some, but I've been quite careful as to who I want to talk about, because you can get carried away with this. You can start talking about every player under the sun that's being remotely linked to West Ham United. But you're wasting your time. I'm wasting your time by talking about them. But with the information drying up, media has to work a lot harder. And when they can't get the information, assumptions are being made. That's how you end up with a Jamie Vardy story. That's how you end up with a Dele Alli story. And honestly, I'd rather not know anything, because what we've had for years is these kind of stories in the past. But in the past, we've had leaks coming out of West Ham, which have given them some kind of credibility. So at this moment in time, I think the only evidence we have is that we're certainly chasing Troy Parrott. I'm not so sure about anyone else. Now it's all about how much we're planning to pay for Troy Parrott, and let's see if that really happens or not. Look, after everything that we've been through with transfers over leaks over years, isn't it making a nice change now that we don't have that kind of culture at West Ham? I don't know. You tell me. Or would you rather have all the leaks?